great new year, second day of the new year, and I hope everybody is equally motivated as you kickstart the new year 2021 after a lot of, tremendously traumatic year 2020. Hopefully, this year gives us much more positive energy to move forward with everything that we want in life. So, all of you here, I believe you're all aspirants for NEET. You want to go for your post graduation studies. So today I will be discussing about some topics regarding dental materials. Uh, I've just assorted some like maybe 4 or 5 questions, and we will be having a short discussion about that. If you have any doubts, please put them up in your chat box so that I can see it. After maybe we'll go to the detailed discussion once my presentation is done. Okay. Can just somebody tell me if you are able to see the screen properly? Can you guys see the screen? Yes. Okay. So getting back to that. Now, every time we talk about success, the first thing that you have to keep in mind is that you need to start off somewhere. You have to start in case you want to succeed, right? If you're apprehensive about not doing something, you're always going to sit back and think or probably wish that you could have done it. But you have to start off doing something. That's how you make a progress. And then next thing is don't quit. It's going to be a hard way ahead. You're going to face a lot of difficulties. That's how everything in life works. So never say quit. You have to keep working towards it. Yes, failure is not the end of it, it's just a part of success. So hopefully that should keep you guys motivated to move ahead. You will find a lot of difficulty preparing yourself, but that's how we can help, right? So dental materials basically is not a very interesting topic that most of us know that as during your BDS days also, you have left dental materials in first year and then not touched about it later on. So when you come for your NEET preparation, it will become difficult because you're going back to your first year, brushing up your books, trying to read through it. So you tend to leave out on a lot of things. But as it's seen, what you have to know is the basics. Basics is what they have been asking, and there are dental materials. Even for this last paper that they had asked in December, there were about a lot of questions which came from dental materials. They did say that you have equal weightage and things like that, but for the last paper, I noticed that there were quite a lot of questions from dental materials, which was relevant, which is all basic stuffs. So that's how you should be preparing. So you can actually go back to previous year's question papers, try working on previous question papers, and then if you are doubtful about something, go back to your textbook, your standard textbooks, go back and read through it. If you want, you can clarify your doubts with somebody and then get to the question. Now, another thing, what I realized about this paper, which we saw recently, was that they're asking you very straightforward questions, but little tricky ways. The questions are really straightforward, but they're really tricky, and your choices are very, very close to each other. So, just by probably mugging up a book and just thinking, okay, this is the answer for this, you have to understand what are those options and then maybe go for the correct answer. The variation between two options are going to be really minimal. Like I have some questions which we will discussing. I will tell you why I say that. The variation between the options are very minimal and it's very difficult. At the first go, just don't, okay, this is it, and just don't click on that. You have to read the question, analyze your answers, and then go back and click on it. Okay. So first we will be talking about something which is in alginate. Okay. So this is the question. When alginate is mixed with tap water having high calcium sulfate and magnesium, what happens? So this was a question, and then you have the options. You have a retardation of the setting reaction, you have permanent deformation of alginate, you have acceleration of setting reaction, or you have weakened distones. Now, if possible, can you guys put it up? What is your answer inside the chat box so that we can discuss about that, please? Okay, you want to see my video. I think it's getting cut off because of this. Just a second. Okay, we have Anaga, Dr. Anaga, who's told it is A. Is it A, doctor? Okay, all of you can put up your answers so that. Yeah, just a second. Sorry about the screen. I'll just do that 1 second. Yeah, so we can have the answers. I can't see any of your chats. Yes, now I can. So we have C, somebody told us A. Okay, we'll come to the answer now. Now, what is the setting reaction for alginate? That is what we have to look for now. What is the setting reaction of alginate? Before we go to the setting reaction, I will just explain what are the components in alginate. So we have sodium alginate, which is a soluble alginate part. Then we have calcium sulfate, which is a reactor. We have trisodium phosphate, which is a retarder. Diatomaceous earth and zinc oxide, which are the filler particles. And potassium titanium fluoride, which is the accelerator. Okay. Now, in this, one thing you have to get it straight into your mind is that the accelerator is not to accelerate the setting of alginate. It is to accelerate your gypsum when you pour your alginate. Okay. Then you have trisodium, your reactor is your calcium sulfate. So basically, alginate becomes a sol when your calcium sulfate reacts with sodium alginate. So that has to happen. So when you mix it with water, the first reaction that has to have, when once calcium sulfate reacts with sodium alginate, it starts setting very fast. So this is the initial reaction that happens. So why do we add a retarder? We add trisodium phosphate as a retarder into this. So you add when you have the retarder, you have an initial reaction which is that is sodium disodium phosphate with calcium sulfate will give you calcium phosphate and sodium sulfate. When this retarder gets exhausted, that is when your calcium sulfate will react with alginate, that is potassium or sodium alginate, to give you calcium alginate, and that is what gets you the solidified form of alginate impression material. So coming back to our question, once you're adding something which is having a high content of calcium sulfate and magnesium, what really happens is that you have lesser of the retarder and more of the reactor, right? So ultimately, your setting reaction becomes really fast. So that is why it is acceleration of the setting reaction. So a lot of them have given the correct answer as C. So I presume you guys have thought that this is the reaction that happens for alginate, and that is why it is accelerating the setting reaction, right? So coming to the next question. Next question is something about hardness tests. We know there are different types of hardness tests. There are micro hardness tests and macro hardness tests. One very, very common topic which is asked in a lot of MCQs is from the hardness test. They ask you in various ways, This is just one question that is asked. They have asked what is the shape of the intender in Knoop hardness test. We know there are different hardness tests which is there, and each of them are done with a machine which has a different shaped intender. Now that is what has to come here. Now, and again, in the same question, okay, all right. I'll go a little bit slower for you guys. Okay. Should I go back to the first question, doctor, or can we continue from here? Okay, I think we'll go a bit slow from here. Okay, you want me to explain the first question. All right. Sure, no problem, doctor. See, when alginate reacts, basically, these are all the components which is present in alginate. You have sodium alginate, you have calcium sulfate, you have trisodium phosphate, you have the fillers, and you have the accelerator. Okay? So from this, what happens is you have the reactor, which is calcium sulfate. Now, how does the alginate set? The reactor has to react with sodium alginate, and then it starts setting. Now, as soon as you pour water into alginate, if this reaction takes place, you will not get any proper working time for alginate. So you will not be able to take a proper impression, right? So what happens for that sake, for retarding or slowing down the reaction, you add something called as a retarder. So yahan pe this retarder that is added is trisodium phosphate. So when you have trisodium phosphate, the reactor first reacts with this retarder. Once the retarder is exhausted, that is when it will start reacting with sodium with the soluble alginate part. Now you get that space, that is your working time. That is how you get working time for alginate. Are you clear till now? Is this okay? Great. So now when you poured water, once you pour water, your reactor and your retarder, that is your sodium phosphate is your retarder and your calcium sulfate is your reactor. They both react together to form something called as a calcium phosphate and sodium sulfate. All right. Now, once your retarder gets exhausted, that is, once the amount of retarder, you must realize that in your alginate composition, you will if you are having about 14 by weight of reactor, maybe it's just 2 or 3 that you have of the retarder. So, okay, so once that, because you don't want to keep on prolonging the working time for a very long time, you need a manipulative working time. Okay, so once this retarder is exhausted, what happens? Your potassium alginate or sodium alginate, that will react with the calcium sulfate, which is present back, and then you will get the alginate. That is the in the consistency where you can take an impression. Now, coming to this question, you are going to add water which is having high amount of calcium sulfate and magnesium. So when you add again calcium sulfate, so your ratio of 14:2 is again changed, where you are adding more calcium sulfate than your retarder can take. So your retarder will burn out really fast. So what happens? Your setting takes place very, very fast. So your answer is going to be the acceleration of your setting reaction. So that is how you will need to manipulate your thought when you see a question like that. Okay? Can we go to the next question? Okay, great. So this, like I was saying, we are talking about hardness test. Now, hardness test, we have different types of hardness tests, and there is a lot of questions which is asked about hardness tests. You have to read through hardness tests, because every question paper you take, they will be twisting the same question up and down, up and down. Every year they have something from hardness test. Either they will ask you which are the micro hardness or which are the macro hardness tests, or they will ask you like this, what is the shape of the intender in the Knoop hardness test. Now, what is basically a hardness test? Once you have a material, in dental materials, everything that we use in dentistry has to have a particular hardness which has to be used. You can't give a prosthesis if it cannot take a proper strength or proper load, right? So it has to be hard enough, but not too either, right? So now what is the now measuring? We'll be measuring the resistance by penetrating. So you have an indentation tool for each test, which will penetrate into the material that you're testing. It will be penetrating into that, and that amount of or depth of penetration will give you a hardness number. Now, there are various types of hardness tests which is done. One is your Knoop hardness test. Then you have your Vickers hardness test. We'll be going through that, okay? Now, coming to your Knoop hardness test, the indentation is done with a shape of a diamond or a rhomboid. Okay, so this is the shape, or the rhombus is what you will be seeing there. Now, the next type of test which will be done is your Vickers hardness test. Now, can you see the difference between your Vickers hardness and your Knoop hardness test? So this is the difference. In a Knoop hardness, you're using a rhomboid shape, that is a wider rhomboidal shape indenter to make the indentation, whereas for Vickers, you use a pyramidal shape. A rhomboid is going to be wider, whereas a pyramidal is going to be slightly more acute, giving you a 90-degree angulation. Then you have something called as a Brinell hardness test. Now, in Brinell hardness test, what is happening is you are going to have an indenter which is going to be circular in nature. It is going to be circular, and that hard indentation is going to be made. So here I have a picture which will show you the indenter shapes for each of them. That is, Brinell is circular, Rockwell is again diamond pointed, Vickers is again, I'm sorry, this is pyramidal, and Knoop is going to be rhomboidal. So now, coming to your question, shape of the indenter in Knoop hardness test. Okay, guys, I think you can put it up in the chat. Rhomboidal. Okay, great. Now, okay, I'll give you guys some time for this. I have put up a picture. Please identify part A. You have to identify the part A which is marked in that picture. And you can start putting up your answers in the chat box. I'm just giving you 2 minutes time, okay? That's your question, and that's how you have to answer in the NEET. So just put up your answers. Then we will discuss about that for sure. I will be explaining about it, no problem. Another very, very important topic when it comes to NEET preparation. Because again, casting procedures, casting defects is a very, very commonly asked topic for NEET. So that's a very, very important topic which has to be discussed, which you guys have to go into detail. So I suggest you guys don't just jump into reading textbooks. It's going to be really traumatic. You're going to have a tough time because you become stressed out. It's very common, you just start reading the textbooks, you don't know from where to start, where you end. You get so stressed out that you just close your books, leave it there, and just let it be. So it's always better that you go through previous question papers, keep working on a lot of question papers. that will give you a confidence that, okay, these are the type of questions that they ask, and this is how I need to approach them. You always have time. You can go back and look back through it, and you can attempt it. So, are you guys done answering for this question? Shall we go to the answer? Okay. So now when you come to this question, I think most of them have given me the correct answer. It is crucible former. Now, this part, that is A, is your crucible former, on top of which you have your sprue which is attached. So part B is your sprue. Your sprue is attached at an angulation of 45 degrees to your wax pattern. Okay, your wax pattern and your sprue is attached at a 45-degree angulation. So your C is your wax pattern. C is your wax pattern, A is your crucible former, and B is your sprue. So we have a wax pattern first. We attach a sprue to it. We take out the pattern with the sprue, invert it, place it into the crucible former. That is how it is kept. Okay? And then what is D? D is your investment material. All of you all must be knowing that you do casting with investment material. You have something called as an investment plaster. So you have investment products which you use for investments, especially when it is exposed to very high temperature. You are going to be casting, you're going to be melting metal and pushing it to it. So it has to withstand. So you use the investment material and not other gypsum like normal plaster or stone or dye stone. Okay. So D is your investment material. E is your casting ring. So around your crucible former, you have a casting ring which is placed. On the crucible former, you have a sprue and your pattern, and then you tap and put through the investment material which is through the casting ring. And this is the space, that is, there should be a space between the top limit of your casting, investment, and your wax pattern. That's approximately to about 6 millimeters minimal space should be available. Otherwise, your investment is going to crack. When you finish your casting and take it out, your investment is going to just crack and chip off. What happens when your investment cracks? When you're pushing in molten metal, if there is crack in your investment, the metal is going to go all the way through there. So instead of maybe your coping or your crown, you're going to get a whole cracked up thing there. All right. Okay. When and where do we use this? Okay. See, we use casting, especially when you're making crowns, bridges, cast partial dentures. These are the three places where you're evidently going to be using casting. Of course, again, you have casted restorations like inlays, onlays, overlays. All these are going to be done with casting. So once you do a tooth preparation, how do you make a crown? That's the basic of this. How do you make a crown? Once you're done with your tooth preparation, you do a tooth preparation in the patient's mouth. Then you take an impression and send it to the lab. This part, what we are discussing right now about investments and all those things, everything is your laboratory section. You are going to be doing this in the lab. If any of you are interested to be taking prosthetics, then you will be doing it in those 3 years of when you will be doing your post-graduation too. So that's where it comes. So since you asked me when and where, that's where you use this. So once that cast is made, once on the cast, you do something called as die cutting, and then you do something called as a ditching process. That's okay. Let's not go deep into it. On that, you make a wax pattern, and then because you have to get the shape. If you are having maybe a PFM crown, a porcelain fused to metal crown, okay, so you have a metal coping onto which a ceramic is added, and you get a ceramic crown, right? So that coping can be done by this. Now, casting is kind of like outdated. Not most of them are outdated, but you can't say it's outdated because most of them still use casting especially when you're doing with hand, you have to have casting. Unless and until you are going to be milling. Now, milling is another option where it is completely computerized. All this is done in the computer. There's no wax pattern. You're just making a computerized system and you have a CAD CAM to mill it. Okay, so that is the second section of this. Can we move to the next one? Okay. So, like I said, these are the parts. You have the crucible former here. You have your sprue. This is your wax pattern, your ring liner or your casting ring with the ring liner. And you have investment material, which should be above your wax pattern by around 6 millimeters. Okay. So that is your answer. Okay. Now, I think this will be quite an easy question. In which situations do you use frozen glass slab technique? Which cement will you use frozen glass slab technique? You can put up your answer, then we'll discuss about it. Only one response. Okay. Are you guys done? You have all the options A, B, C. Everybody's put up everything. Okay, great. Okay. Okay, guys, for all those who put B, I will say never. Why would you want to mix glass ionomer on a glass slab? Never. Never use a glass slab to mix glass ionomer. Put it into your head. This is like done because glass ionomer, you know, the components in glass ionomer, the silica particles are going to react with glass and it is going to create much more of issues that will be dealt in detail when we do about cement. Okay. So, and of course, zinc oxide eugenol, you don't really have to use a frozen glass slab technique. Okay. And resin cement, again, resin cement mostly we don't use glass slabs. It's always on the mixing pads, resin cements and glass ionomers. Okay. So here the answer is going to be zinc phosphate. Why zinc phosphate? How do you mix zinc phosphate cement? There are two types of zinc phosphate cements basically. Okay, one is for luting type 1 and the other one is base. Now in this, how do we know? What you have to do is in this technique, what is done is that you have a glass slab which is cooled, okay, approximately to about 6 degrees Celsius, maybe around 6 to minus 10 degrees Celsius. You have a glass slab which is cooled. Okay, what is the advantage of cooling is that it will give you an increase in working time. It will increase your working time with zinc phosphate cement to about 4 to 11 minutes. That is by decreasing your setting time to about 20 to 40%. Okay, and also helps to incorporate more of the powder. Now, when you incorporate more of the powder, there is a much better consistency and much adaptable consistency that you receive when you want to use it for a base. Okay. Now, as you know, once you mix zinc phosphate, okay, you mix it in a circular motion, part by part, you mix it in a very circular portion. And when you lift your spatula, you have to have a stringy appearance for luting, right? So, frozen glass slab technique is used when you want to increase your working time with zinc phosphate. Okay, so the answer for this question is that it is for zinc phosphate. Glass ionomer cement is never mixed on a glass slab. Glass and glass, no, it will not match with each other. It is never mixed on a glass slab. So those who felt it is glass ionomer, so you guys should just keep this in mind that glass ionomer cement is never done on a glass slab. You always use a mixing pad for that. Okay. Okay, so here we come to the last topic question of today. You have an object, okay? look very clearly into this question. This one I want all of you all to answer me, because until you guys answer, I'm not going to discuss this with you. You have an object which is viewed under two different light sources. Okay, what is that phenomenon called? Is it opalescence? Is it fluorescence? Is it metamerism? Or is it called as a Bezold-Brock effect? Great. I think most of you guys have got the correct one. Yes, it is called as metamerism. Okay. So basically, what is opalescence? Opalescence is the translucency that you see. So, you know, when there is a light passes through a tooth, there is some light which hits the enamel rods and reflects back. Some of them passes through the enamel rods. So that gives a beautiful translucent effect on your tooth, especially for your incisal edges in your anteriors. That's how translucency, that is what is basically called as translucency. Okay. Then next question, next option was, yes, this is the answer. You have metamerism. Metamerism is when the same object is seen in two different light sources. Two different light sources. It will appear shade is slightly different. Okay, Dr. Shubham, you want me to repeat on opalescence or metamerism? Opalescence. Okay. Opalescence is basically translucency. Okay. When you see the incisal portion of your anterior tooth, you will see it is much more your enamel is much more translucent than your dentinal level, right? When you smile, that is what gives you that sparkling white appearance. It is that translucency that gives you that sparkling white appearance. As you know, your dentin is much more yellowish in shade than your enamel. So what happens in translucency, that is opalescence, is that when light goes and hits on your incisal edge, okay, through the enamel, you have enamel rods which is arranged, right? So some of the light passes through it and some of the light hits the rods and scatters off. So that is what gives you a translucent effect. Okay, so to get that effect in for crowns, you add something called as a cerium oxide for ceramic crowns and veneers and all, to get that translucency into that. All right, is that okay, doctor? I guess so. Okay, now coming to metamerism, you view a single tooth. You are doing any procedure. You're going to go, maybe let's say you're going to do a composite restoration. You have your light, your chair light is on, and you're viewing, and you're doing a shade selection. You do your restoration, and your patient walks out, goes into the light, and says, "Oh, doctor, see, this was not what you showed me inside. In that light, it was looking different. Now, this in the sunlight, it is looking something else." So that property of the same object having two different shades in different sources of light is called as metamerism. So that is the reason why we always suggest, when you do shade selection, always do shade selection in natural light. It's always best that you select the shade with natural light. You should always have a natural lighting when you want to do a proper shade selection. We don't usually use your chair light to select the shade, and then the patient is obviously going to go out into the sunlight. Na? They are not going to be sitting always on the dental chair and seeing the shade. So you have to always make sure that you select that shade in natural light. Okay, that is metamerism. How about fluorescence? Now, see, for fluorescence, it is that, you know, the tooth has an absorption energy, okay, and it will convert a light of longer wavelength into a shorter wavelength, and it is emitted back. So when it is emitted back, it is going to give a slightish bluish hue. Now that gives the tooth a very vital appearance. Okay, so that is what you have heard of fluorescent colors. It is something like that. Just keep in mind, where a shade is changed, where you get a bluish hue from the tooth. That is what fluorescence is about. And what is Bezold-Brooke effect? When light falls in our eyes, you have rods and cones, right? So one thing you have to get it in mind is that when dim light falls into your eyes, your rods get activated first, and then your cones. Okay, so the color perception will decrease because color perception happens more with the cone cells and not with the rod cells, right? So at dim lighting, your rods are much more active, so your color perception will change. So now in Bezold-Brooke effect, the difference of it from metamerism is that in this, your same color will appear different colors in different intensities of light. That is the difference between these two. For metamerism, it was under two different sources of light, whereas in Bezold-Brooke effect, it is under two different intensities of light that your shade perception will change. All right. So that answer for this question of metamerism, I had a discussion with this with some of them, and the first thing they told me was, man, this is Bezold-Brooke effect. That is, you're too fast jumping into the conclusion. You have to go through the question very clearly before you answer. See, it is only a difference of a word. One is different sources, the other one is different intensity. Just one word difference, but the answer becomes completely different. Okay, so that is how you have to be preparing yourself for post-graduation competitive examination, because you are going to see, once you start preparing a lot of questions, then you become much more thorough. In the initial days, you will definitely find a little bit more of difficulties trying to go back, find out the questions, or then come back to the answer. But you will be always make notes. It will be very helpful. If you're reading through some topic, make your own notes so that you don't have to go back again to the textbook the next time you go through, when you go for your second revision. Make notes, it will really help you. We are in dentistry, probably we are also used to writing paragraphs and long answer, short answer, 10-mark question, 20-mark question. That is why we find it very, very challenging when it comes to MCQs. But it should go good for you guys, because it's just the beginning of the year. Okay, somebody wants me to repeat on Bezold-Brooke effect. Okay, I'll do that. See, doctor, we did mention that metamerism is the same object appears to be in two different colors in two different lights. That is, one in sunlight and one in probably a chair light, that is incandescent light or fluorescent light, whatever it is. Okay, so it appears to be in two different colors. In Bezold-Brooke effect, you have two intensities of light. That is, I am viewing the same color in a darker, a higher intensity light and a dim light, bright light and dim light. When I see in dim light, the color perception is decreased. So it look very shady and, a lesser intense color for me. When it is a brighter light, the color will change because your cones become active. That is when your color perception also changes. Okay, so Bezold-Brooke effect is the same object appearing to be as two different colors in different intensities of light, that is in dim light or bright light. That is the difference between Bezold-Brooke and metamerism. Okay, is that okay now? All right, fine. So tomorrow we have a session in orthodontics by Dr. Binu Abraham. So it would be great if you guys would want to join in and hear from him about some questions like this for ortho. So this is how we will be guiding you at Focus. So, and hopefully this 5 questions also did help you guys, and hopefully if you're there with us, we can help you with dental materials. I know dental materials is a very dry subject, but I guess I was trying to make it as interesting as possible from the way I could do it. Hopefully it was helpful for you guys. Okay, so always keep in mind that it's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. You don't get anything easy. because what you get easy doesn't stick long. Probably that's what we have all heard of, and that's, I think sometimes that is the way it works. It's going to be hard, but hard does not mean it is impossible. Once once you cross the impossible, yeah, I think you guys will really crack it in a with flying colors. Okay, so happy New Year to all of you all. Hopefully, you guys have a great year ahead with a lot of motivation, and you guys do extremely well for your next examination coming in December. You have time. You have easily like 11, 12 months. So you guys can do a great job. Okay. Thank you so much. And thanks for being here.